Wandering Winder here with the first day of previews for the next Dominion set because we haven't had enough Dominion this year, apparently. Great. Lots of stuff to cover. Let's just jump right into it, starting with tools, which is a 4-cost treasure. It says gain a copy of a card anyone has in play, which includes presumably tools. Um, that is not very exciting, although I guess if Tools is a good card, it can pile itself over a few turns if you can keep drawing them. Although continuing to draw them because it's a stop card is maybe not the great. It is just like a workshop or a smuggler's, but um, I say workshop because it's like gain stuff, or smugglers because it can gain more expensive stuff than stuff that costs four. But unlike smugglers, you're mostly only gaining from yourself. The way you can gain from another player is going to be if you have if they have a duration in play and sometimes reactions. Um, Mostly. Um, yeah, card. I mean, my gut reaction to most workshops is that's not very good. You certainly, I don't think, want to be getting this card very early very often, but once I suppose you are getting to the point where you're drawing pretty well, this can help you get more of those draw cards if the game is going to continue for a while. I'm just a little bit skeptical that this is the best payload to be able to do that, but sometimes it will be. This is probably, and I guess, and I should say, if there are good durations in play on the board, um, then this card may be very good. Like I'm envisioning Wharf there, right? With Wharf in play, you still don't want to open this really, but with Wharf in play, this is going to be gain a Wharf in a decent number of chances. You probably don't want too many of them because that pile's just going to run, and then this card gets worse. Although it can still gain, whatever you've played on the turn. Make sure you play any other treasures you'd want to gain with it before this. Yeah, this is probably pretty decent to good if you can draw, and if you can't draw, it's going to be real lousy. Um, yeah, I mean, I look at it and see a workshop, and I don't tend to like workshops, but whatever. Let's move on. Pendant, 5-cost treasure, and it just gives you money. It gives you 1 money per differently named treasure you have in play. So that's presumably going to include the pendant itself. So that's 1. You're often going to have a copper, which makes 2. If you get a silver in play as well, that's 3. Gold would make it 4. Any specialty treasures could be more. Um, so in the case of money, this is probably not very exciting. Um, it's just not going to be that easy if you're not drawing cards to get this and a copper and a silver all that reliably. Like, it's reliably going to be at least as good as silver, but to be as good as gold, I don't think that's going to be super reliable. And a 5-cost gold, even for money, isn't super exciting. Like, you play it, but it's not super exciting. If you are drawing, though, um, I mean, you could just figure out how much money this makes, right? If you're drawing your deck, how many differently named treasures do you have in your deck? And this could be like a cheap platinum. Um, it's always going to make less money than bank. Well, sometimes it will make the same amount. It will never make more money than bank, is I guess what I should say. Um, but it's also too cheaper than bank, which is a big deal. Bank isn't the most exciting, and just a stop card that just makes money isn't, I don't know, that exciting to me. I don't think this card is super strong. Like, again, if you're drawing your deck, I think there's often going to be a better payload. If this is only making 4 because you have silver, copper, gold, and these, like, you can do worse, but if your payload is all money just from treasures like that, what are you doing? Why are you drawing your deck just to do that? Like, you know what I mean? It's just not that strong in general. Like, oh, I just made a bunch of money, and just making a bunch of money without buy, without whatever, isn't the most exciting. Now, maybe you have buy because you got market squares or something, and you can make something out of this. I just don't think it seems particularly strong. Like, not like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible, but I don't think it seems particularly strong. I think it's probably a reasonably weak card. Let's move on. Mining Road. Mining Road is a 5 cost action, plus an action, plus a buy, plus 2 money. And then once this turn, when you gain a treasure, you may play it. Okay, so the first three things are kind of like a silver with a buy, right? Plus an action, plus 2 money is very much like action phase silver, or silver you can draw dead. Plus the buy helps it out a good amount. But like if you want to look at the five at just the top bit, you compare it to Festival, and you're not a village and otherwise the same. And Festival is okay, not super strong, and the village part of it is like a big part of its strength. So just the top three things is not very exciting. Although it's still probably more exciting than, I don't know, like Mystic or something. Maybe? I don't know, maybe not. So then you got to figure out how good is this. You got to figure out how good is this once this turn, when you gain a treasure, blah 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 thing. If the treasure is just making money, then that is fine. I guess it makes the treasure cheaper. So if you were going to buy a gold anyway, then effectively the gold costs 3. If you're going to buy a silver, effectively the silver costs 1. If you were in the market for those kinds of things, this is fine. Um, and I guess if you're playing a money deck, then this making your treasures cheaper is fine, and like it's a silver in the worst case, so fine. Um, you can also buy coppers with this, and that effectively makes this make more money, right? So if I buy a copper with this, it's like it was a gold that added a copper to my deck. Which is because you buy the copper, it costs 0, it makes some money, you're net up money this turn. So for a money deck, this is like a gold that when you're using the third money, um, makes you gain a copper, which is not great for 5 at all, but maybe useful in the end. But it's also alternatively can be something that helps you gain more treasures more efficiently. So you can get silver and something, and the silver only costs 1. You can get gold and something, and the gold only costs 3. It's probably pretty reasonable for money, but not like super exciting. Not like, oh man, this is on the board, I sure want to play money. But the combination of those effects probably make it reasonable for money. If you're drawing, you're going to want a specialty treasure, I think. Something that does more than just making money. So if it's, you're gaining playing a bank, maybe that's a ton of money. But other than that, you're going to want, I don't know, supplies or something, so it offsets the draw. Supplies is probably actually a really, really good thing to be getting with this, because you get a horse on top right away, and the supplies is pretty cheap then. But I could imagine other specialties, right? Like Horn of Plenty, or getting to play that immediately is pretty nice. Maybe other stuff in this set, because apparently treasures are a bit of a theme of this set. Um, yeah, we'll have to see on that. But I think reasonable for money, maybe okay if you've got some specialty treasures, otherwise not exciting at all. But I guess it is also plus buy, and sometimes you need plus buy, and if it's the only plus buy on the board, well, there you go. Let's move on. Rope. Rope is a 4-cost treasure duration. At the start of your it gives you on play. It gives you a money and a buy, and then at the start of your next turn, plus 1 card, and you may trash a card from your hand. So this is very much like the duration version of Junk Dealer, right? Except it also gives you a buy. It's like a duration, I guess, kind of market Junk Dealer. The duration market is very much like Market Square, which is without the reaction, which is not super strong but fine. This also lets you trash though, and it gives you a buy. I guess markets. Did I say Market Square? I meant Caravan Guard. I definitely meant Caravan Guard. Caravan Guard doesn't give you a buy, so this is now this doesn't give you the buy the next turn. But if you have two of these and you're playing one every turn, then they are net card neutral, right? And I mean, just any of these is net card neutral over the course of many turns. It's a stop card the first turn you draw it, and then the turn after you've played it, it's drawing you a card, blah, blah, blah. So it's like two of these together every turn is like a market if you're never using the trashing, which is you could do worse, but you could also do better. It's also that's not an entirely fair comparison because a card at the start of your turn is a card at the start of your turn, not a card that you can trip into. So you're more likely to be able to find the village you need. Blah 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 blah. So that's probably a little bit better, but being a duration is its downsides, as I'll get to. The trashing part is probably a big deal of this, right? So this is why I mostly want to compare this to Junk Dealer. It's really good to be able to draw a card and trash a card and not be down in action. So that's really nice. The question is just how much is the duration drawback here? So the duration drawback means you're not ever playing it every turn, which is a lot worse than if you were playing it every turn. Now for the trashing part, that's maybe not so bad after a point, because by the time you're drawing a thing to play it every turn, you need to trash maybe a bit less. You also have to do the trashing at the start of your turn. Now you do get a sixth card to look at, but it has to be at the start of your turn. So once you're drawing, you have less selection on what you're trashing. Maybe a little bit hard to trash a little bit of junk that comes in later on. If your opponent is like slow junking you, getting that last, or maybe even if they're not slow junking you, getting the last junky card or two out of the deck may be a bit harder than if you would have a junk dealer. And then this misses shuffles a lot more, and I think this is a key thing. So early on, if you ever play it the turn before a shuffle, or the turn you have shuffled, it's missed the shuffle as opposed to only being the turn you have shuffled. So big thing would be turns 3, turns 4. If you play this turn 3, that's very good. You're going to get the money on turn 3. You're going to draw a card on turn 4. You're going to trash a card on turn 4. That's really, really good. If you draw it on turn 4, you're going to get the money on turn 4. You're going to draw a card on turn 5, trash a card on turn 5, and not have this card to play on that next shuffle. It's a lot worse, I think. Sometimes the stuff missing the shuffle isn't so bad. I think in this case it is pretty bad, similar to what we see with like Transmogrify. Turn 3 Transmogrify tends to be a lot better than turn 4 Transmogrify. So that is my main concern with this card. I mean, my main concern in terms of fun is that turn 3 versus turn 4 is going to be a big difference. But if this only costs 3, so you would alleviate that problem somewhat, then you'd open double it a lot, I think, because I think this card is pretty strong. But the all of those downsides that I just said are really going to hold it back. So I don't think it's going to be premium, and I do think other trashers are going to be better if they are quote unquote strong trashers. So this is going to be somewhere in the middle, I think. Still good enough to get in a lot of cases, but not like, wow, Chapel is on the board. It's a really good trasher. It's definitely got to be notches below that, a couple notches probably. But again, it's also, if it's the only plus buy on the board, hey, it's plus buy, and it's non-terminal plus buy. So, and it's kind of non-stop card plus buy. So, I mean, that all adds up to, if you're trying to draw your deck, you're probably going to want some of these at some point, whether for the buy or for the trashing or for both. So, I mean, the card probably has to be pretty darn good. Even for money, it makes 1 money less than a silver. Um, a small number of copies of this to trash your estates. It's going to be a little hard to hit the estates, but a small number of these to trash your estates, and maybe you can use the buy, right? If there's some cheap thing you're going to want a lot of, like supplies, even in money, this is going to be okay. But it really points you towards drawing if that's at all like plausible. Let's move on to the events for the day, which is the second thing part of today. Like I said, there's a lot. So, yeah, let's keep going. So, bury or bury, depending on how you want to pronounce it, costs some money. It gives you your buyback, +1 buy. Uh, that's maybe a confusing way to phrase it. +1 buy, which means it gives you your buyback. It effectively doesn't cost a buy because it gives you the buyback. And then put any card from your discard pile on the bottom of your deck. So that could be a card you've gained, could be a card you've bought even this turn. On the bottom of your deck is interesting, but because it's coming from your discard pile, that means you're going to see it faster. It's kind of like top decking it for the next shuffle, kind of. Um, you can do this any number of times, so you can set up a combo if you have multiple pieces in the discard pile. Um, this kind of card or this kind of event probably could have made Counting House work back when Counting House was a thing. If you need two cards to come together and you have a bloated deck, getting this semi late in the shuffle can encourage those cards to come together. But additionally, even if you don't have a bloated deck, if there's just a way you can get those cards in your discard pile via like a warehouse or some effect like that, then that is something that you can set up to do potentially every turn, or if you just have to regain them every turn, maybe. Although that's pretty expensive. So what cards was that going to be worth trying to set up for if you're drawing? I don't know. There's so many different combinations that I'm sure that will be the case in a lot of cases. I'm struggling to think of cases off the top of my head that aren't something like King's Court and something, but the problem for most of the cases is you're going to want to play them every turn. And so it's going to be a big deal to have them in your discard pile, unless you're just gaining a bunch of stuff. If you're just gaining a bunch of stuff, buying this twice to have a village and a smithy or something that you've bought this turn at the start of your next hand, I mean, I guess I could see it. It's just like, how much are you doing that you have enough resources to buy or gain a village and a smithy and buy this twice and still do whatever other things you're trying to do on the turn? The answer is going to be sometimes you can do that. But other times, like, I guess the thing that most interests me about this event is if you're playing a deck that has a few really, really good cards, then you can just buy this. Well, I was going to say you could buy it every turn. That's going to be hard because they only go on the bottom. So it's not like if it went on the top, you could really set this up every turn. They only go on the bottom. But if there's a way you can, like, I don't know, discard your deck or something. So you use this plus scavenger plus something that makes a ton of money. And then no matter how bloated your deck is, you can kind of do that every turn, right? You can probably make some kind of a golden deck with this and scavenger and enough cards that make enough money. But they're going to have to make like 3 money at least if you want to buy a province, because you're going to have to buy this a lot. But that is something to watch out for. Otherwise, just getting a couple of combination of cards to come together. There's probably other cool things you can do with this, but it seems useful in a pinch sometimes. Overall, not the biggest thing. And if you're drawing your deck every turn, then yeah, maybe sometimes you spend the money to top deck something effectively for the next turn after you've bought it, which is also probably pretty nice, but not, totally game breaking. Let's move on to Maelstrom. 4-cost event, Trash 3 cards from your hand. Each other player with 5 or more cards in hand trashes one of them. So note this says 3 cards, not up to 3 cards, which is going to limit its ability to, like, if you have 2 cards you want to trash and a province in your hand, that's going to be a little bit annoying sometimes, probably. As an early trasher, if your opponent didn't get to trash, like, you're going to open this a lot, right? We know banish is pretty good in a number of cases. Because your opponent gets to trash one, that's going to severely restrict when you would want to do this early on. Like, you're probably not going to want to open it because, oh, I get to trash an estate, but so does my opponent. Now, you may still do that sometimes if, like, if you're player 2 and it's turn 2 and you get to trash an estate, and then your opponent maybe gets to trash something. They only get to trash 1 card. You're only trashing 1 card. But if there's, like, really no card you want for some very strange reason, I guess you could do it. It seems really hard to imagine a situation like that where you'd really get it early, though. So I think it's going to more be later. So later on, you're really mostly going to want to be wanting to trash 3 cards with it. Sometimes it's going to be worth it. Maybe if you're only trashing 2, you're mostly going to be wanting to trash 3 so that your opponent only getting 1. Or if your opponent is unlikely to be able to take a benefit from it, so they've already trashed more than you somehow know that all the cards in their hand are good. Or the other thing is that this is going to work with attacks that make your opponent not have 5 cards in hand. I guess it can also be an attack they have to trash a card. So if you've drawn your deck and you have no cards left that you want to keep, then this lets you potentially trash some cards and force your opponent to trash a card from their hand if they also have no cards in their hand that they want to trash. I think that's pretty narrow, but it could come up. I think I'm mostly looking at this to be a trasher for me, and particularly with some kind of an attack that makes my opponent not be able to trash as effectively. This might be something that you use. Trashing 3 cards as an event is super strong, but you really want to make sure that you're getting more benefit out of it than your opponent. You want to be trashing at least 2 and probably actually 3 for it to be worth it. But if you are trashing 3 cards and your opponent gets to trash 1 junk card, and I mean 3 cards you really want to trash, then that's probably still pretty good. 2 versus your opponent's 1, yeah, that's going to be good, but in a lot of cases there's going to be something better to do, I think. 1 versus 1 is going to be quite rare, I think. But it's going to depend on, like, if you can imagine that your opponent isn't going to have a card they want to trash. Yeah, a little hard to evaluate. Let's move on to prepare. Prepare is a 3-cost event. It says set aside your hand face up. At the start of your turn, play those actions and treasures in any order. Then which card? Discard the rest. So, yeah, I'm just realizing I probably should have zoomed in on all these things. I'll see if I can. I guess it's kind of hard to do that. I'll try to maybe figure that out for tomorrow. But I have read the text of all these, and you can go find them online. My apologies for that. I'm still not really set up to be recording much at the moment. It's just, previews. I'm going to try to do this all these days this week. We'll see whether I'm going to be able to or not, etc., etc., etc. So I do apologize if these are a bit small on your screen, but yeah. Right, back to prepare. 3 costs. Set aside your hand face up at the start of your next turn. Play those actions and treasures in any order, then discard the rest. So, this seems quite strong to me. It's like a super delay, right? You get to delay everything in your hand, including treasures, which is nice. It does cost 3, where a delay costs 0. And yeah, what more is there to say about this? You also set aside the other cards in your hand, which is really saying something. So I think that's a big deal. That it's easy to overlook. But, like, if you're drawing your deck and you have 2 provinces in it, spending 3 in a buy on this, you're setting aside those provinces next turn. That's already good, right? And then if you get to set aside a copper or something because you didn't need to spend it, even better, and you get the extra money next turn. So like this is a massive amount of draw in that case, right? Anything you're not playing, if you're trying to draw your deck, anything you're not playing is staying out of your next turn. If you're shuffling, it's staying out of your next shuffle. So you could even buy this on turn 2, right? If I have 3 coppers in my hand on turn 2, buying this turn 2 keeps the 2 estates out of my deck, right? So my next shuffle is smaller. If I have 4 coppers on turn 2, buying this, I can either just leave the 1 estate out of my deck and have a clean shuffle next turn with 4 coppers, well, with presumably the 7 coppers, 2 estates, and whatever card you bought. So that's a 10 card shuffle. You can do that. Don't know that I'd recommend it a ton, but we'll see. I'll do the math on this at some point later. More likely you're going to want to, spend 3, have the copper, so then you're going to have 1 money next turn. The estate's going to be a side. 1 of your coppers is a side. Again, I'll do the math on that at some point. But like even early on, this is probably something worth thinking about buying. Because it takes a buy, much like delay, it's going to be really good or much better in cases where you have plus buy cards like Silk Merchant, Wharf, whatever, plus buy cards that you're not necessarily using all the buys for already. You can shuffle money into your next hand. You can shuffle stuff across. Shuffle money into. That's not the right. You can scooch money. What word am I looking for? You can ferry money. Oh, that's also a Dominion card. You can move money from this hand into next hand, and you can keep the cards, the junk cards in your hand, basically out of your deck. You're not going to have to draw them because they're going to be set aside. It's like an anti-Haunted Woods attack, right? That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say is instead of the junk cards in your hand being something you have to draw next turn, there's something you definitely don't have to draw next turn. Now, you're not going to be able to do that every turn because it's set them aside face up. They're not going to be in play. They're not going to be in your hand because you have to discard the rest. So if you shuffle after the start of next turn, you will still eventually have to draw those cards, but it'll be at the end of the shuffle, right? Yeah. And then, let alone if you're using this to be able to set up because you have a little overdraw, you're using it to actually delay some actions or delay some treasures. That can be powerful. Also, just ferrying, pulling money across into your next turn in money could be significant, right? You get towards the late game, you have a hand that doesn't buy a province. You spend the minimum amount of money, and if you're late enough in a shuffle, you may need to figure out which treasures exactly you want to use to make the 3 money. Probably your worst treasures. Although I guess if you're triggering a shuffle, it's not going to matter. Maybe that doesn't matter. Unless it's like a specialty treasure like supplies or something, in which case it will matter when you play them, etc., etc. Anyway, but just like saying, oh, I only made 7 this turn. Well, now I can move 4 of that money across to next turn and have a much better chance of provincing next turn, right? You're not going to miss province 3 turns in a row because you keep hitting 7 anymore. So that could give you some staying power in money decks as well. I think this is a very strong event. If you don't have plus buy, then that limits it to more of that money context. If you do have plus buy, yeah, making junk miss your next shuffle or miss your next turn, which is likely going to be the next shuffle. There's going to be a lot I think you can do with this. I think this is very strong. Anyway, that's it for today. Half an hour video already, so I'm not going to go too much. Leave your comments, leave your questions, etc., etc., etc. We'll try to be back tomorrow. Maybe I'll figure out how to make these cards bigger. I do apologize for that again. Although, again, I'm busy enough. Maybe I won't figure out how to make these images bigger. So we'll see. Tell me if it's super important to you viewers. Yeah, let me know what you guys and girls and people think about all of these things that I have been showing off. I've been showing off. I mean, you can go find other people's opinions, I'm sure, elsewhere, etc., etc. I'm blabbering on too much. This is Wandering Winder. Thanks for watching.